How you guys all doing? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiaga, live today on Friday, June the 21st, going over some more stories in the NFL today, surrounding a lot of interesting storylines and some more discussion topics that I wanted to get into on today's show. Starting off with the most important news, I think, of the day, Rhamondre Stevenson getting a new contract extension with the New England Patriots, sort of setting a bar for Najee Harris and how that will affect him and his contract negotiations with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Then we're going to go over a potential solution to the quarterback market just growing and growing over the last few years. What could be a potential solution to that, and how could these quarterbacks and their contracts keep growing over the next few years, and what can be done about that? Then a defender in the AFC North pointed out a potential difference maker outside of all the talented quarterbacks that they already have in that division, and what to make of it. Do I agree with it? And what can be done about those difference makers, and how important can they be in 2024? All that and much more on today's show. So make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, as well as remembering, if you have any questions or comments you want to make, use the tip and donations link, GSMCpodcast.net, that you see on your screen. By using that, I'm able to see your question or comment, address it, and just get your guys' thoughts and perspective on anything you have to say on any of the topics on today's show. It's a massive help for the show and the network, so if you would, please use the tip and donations link, GSMCpodcast.net. But in saying that, we'll get back to the first topic and start off by talking about that new contract that Rhamondre Stevenson got with the New England Patriots. Yesterday, it was announced a 4-year, $36 million deal between Stevenson and the Patriots, keeping him there for the foreseeable future until his 30s. He is 26 years old and has $17 million guaranteed going his way from the Patriots. He was only able last year to play in 12 games because of a high ankle sprain, but the year before that, in 2022, he was the Patriots' leading rusher, tallying over 1,000 yards, 5 yards per carry, 5 touchdowns, 69 receptions, and 421 receiving yards. And they might not be the most popping numbers in terms of stats, but the fact that over the last 3 seasons he was splitting carries with Damian Harris, Ezekiel Elliott, now he really steps into the limelight to really be that workhorse running back. They also signed Antonio Gibson this offseason, but I would still expect, based on just my evaluation of it and what head coach Gerard Mayo has said about the topic, that Rhamondre Stevenson will probably predominantly get most of the carries this season. They feel that gives him the best chance to win, and I would have to agree with that, just because he has been pretty dominant is the word that pops up right away during his time here with the Patriots. Slow uprising and development, but recently, over the last few years, he has become more and more of a difference maker for the Patriots, and just fitting their style, I think, that they could sort of go to when maybe they don't have the most prominent, elite, bona fide wide receivers, the most elite quarterbacks maybe anymore. We'll see how Drake May turns out, but going to a running game and having a solid running back and a pretty decent O-line is a great way to do that. And Rhamondre Stevenson has been with the Patriots so far that he is actually only 3,188 yards away from becoming the franchise leader in terms of rushing yards. A good way away from beating Sam Cunningham's record, but that kind of shows that he has been here for a while and has already made an impact with the New England Patriots organization. I had no idea he was that close to break that deal, and if he keeps averaging what he has been averaging for the last 2 to 3 years, about 800 to 700 yards, he'll certainly get that, and he'll cement a legacy, really, all in all, for himself with the Patriots. But now that sort of puts him in a group this offseason with Saquon, Christian McCaffrey, and Josh Jacobs as the running backs to get paid and get a new contract heading into 2024. That is all well and good for the running backs. I'm sure every running back loves seeing their peers get paid to sort of try and uptick that value that the market has sort of fallen off a little bit. Now they get some more guys getting paid. Christian McCaffrey is getting paid almost $20 million per year on his new contract. So hopefully this is a turning point a little bit for the running back market. You'd love to see that, because some of those guys that I mentioned, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon, and Rhamondre Stevenson even too, are very much difference makers for their organization. So hopefully it can get back to a little bit more of an equal sort of look for this running back market. But what does that mean now for Najee Harris? I wanted to switch over to that a little bit more because he is now probably the most prominent name in the running back market that needs a new contract extension, because like we talked about yesterday or a few days ago, that the Steelers didn't pick up Najee's fifth-year option. They declined it, so this year, 2024, will be the last year on his rookie deal. And it does come down to a tough decision for the Steelers, because at one end, how much more can Najee do for this organization to earn himself a pretty good contract, something that is worth what he has brought to the Steelers? But at the other hand, where do they stand on feeling comfortable maybe paying Najee Harris $9 million, $10 million? Because what Rhamondre Stevenson just got, 36 for 4 years, $9 million per year, that's probably the absolute minimum I would think Najee would accept by the Pittsburgh Steelers. And you can't blame him, because basically Rhamondre and Najee have pretty equal careers in terms of being in the league 3 years. Also 26 years old. Rhamondre just got his deal this year. Najee needs one now too. And if you look at them side by side, a comparison, Najee has bested him in yards in the NFL. In touchdowns, he has significantly more carries than Rhamondre Stevenson does. And Rhamondre, with all that being true, is making $9 million per year already. So based on that, you can only think that Najee believes that he definitely deserves at least absolute minimum $9 million from the Pittsburgh Steelers. And if you look at some of these numbers too, I wanted to bring them up because 3 years in the NFL as a running back, and talking about running backs and how they do so much, you think of Christian McCaffrey in the passing game, the running game, and just being a weapon all over. Even to Alvin Kamara, Saquon, now them being in the league a few more years, how they've developed into this workhorse running back now later in their careers. But already Najee, since coming out of college, out of Alabama, and straight into the Pittsburgh Steelers, he got 307 carries as a rookie, and he has 834 carries through 3 years in the NFL, which is just insane. Almost 1,000 carries without even getting your first contract extension is a lot of work on Najee. And like I mentioned before, he has averaged 1,000 yards in each of his first 3 years, the first running back in Steelers history to do that. And also, some more of his stats: 22 touchdowns in 3 years, 28 touchdowns if you include the 6 receiving touchdowns on top of all that. And with all of that being the case, those sort of numbers that I just threw out there, 834 carries, 1,000 yards each year, just right out of college, those numbers are what you'd expect out of Christian McCaffrey, Saquon, Alvin Kamara, some of these running backs now at this point in their career. Najee has been doing this since he stepped foot in the NFL right out of college, so it does have a different level to it, a different feeling for this, because how he's performing now, you can only, I guess from one end, expect him to get better because he is 26, but on the flip side of that, playing devil's advocate, because he's done so much already, is that too much wear and tear on him that you can't really expect him to improve so much because his body's already taken so much punishment? There's a bit of give and take there, obviously something that the Steelers have to work around and discuss, but to me, just based on what he has done so far in a very tough period with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and being there since the rebuild, being there since all the tough times, the rough offenses, just doing everything that he can from a running back position, I think he has earned himself at least $10 million in reality from anybody. If it doesn't happen to be with the Steelers, that's the reality of it. If the Steelers feel that isn't something they could squeeze into their salary cap, then they're going to have to part ways, because Najee, I think, shouldn't sell himself short for everything that he's done already. I think 10 should be the minimum for him. And not a lot of people talk about him, obviously, because of the team success. And just other than that, it's not too flashy. The Steelers run the ball a lot more, and you can see it evidently from the amount of carries he already has. But he isn't really talked about in the limelight of Christian, of Saquon as much, just because I don't think it's too out there so much in the media, where with the Steelers, they're not in the media too much. They're not really talked about as much because there's nothing really to talk about when the games aren't entertaining, low-scoring games. Najee's doing great, but maybe it's just not out there as much as what you see from Christian in some of those games with the 49ers, even with Alvin Kamara and doing everything that he does in the passing game as well. It's not as flashy, but if you really look into it and how much Najee's already contributed to this offense, $10 million is what he should get. And will he get that in this sort of running back market? I think someone will give it to him. The Steelers give me the best impression that they could because I feel that they value him a lot outside of just the football field, but I think someone will give this to him. You know, he's at a good age at 26. He has proven that he could do a lot with a very poor offensive line, and if you could fit him in to a potential high-powered offense, I don't know who needs a running back off the top of my head right now that is considered a high-powered offense just because there's so many that already have a running back, but if you could fit him into something like that, or if the Steelers can find a way to squeeze him into their cap, I think this would make the most sense. He shouldn't take anything less than 10. I'll re-emphasize that because that would be selling himself short in my opinion. Can the Steelers fit that in on top of extending Cam Hayward? A very tough decision because those are two of your captains right there, two of your locker room leaders. So it's going to be definitely a tall task for the Steelers. They don't negotiate again during the regular season, so both of these, maybe one of them, maybe none of them, are going to get done before the start of the regular season in September. So we are coming down to it a little bit here. About 2.5 months left now for those deals to get done. So keep an eye out on that. Those will be two of the most important ones for two massive pieces for the Steelers on each side of the ball to look out for. But again, Rhamondre Stevenson gets his contract, and now he'll be cemented there with the New England Patriots for years to come. So with that being said, we're going to take a break from the show. We're going to go into our first break, and when we return, we're going to talk about the quarterbacks even more now and a potential salary cap only for the quarterbacks that was brought up, that has been discussed around the NFL as a potential solution to this rising quarterback market that we continue to see over the last few years. Is that a good idea? And what else can be done about that with the quarterbacks earning so much? We're going to get into that right after this. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, I'll diss my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
We are back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to get into a deeper discussion around the quarterback market. Is the rising price of all these contracts in the NFL for these quarterbacks becoming a problem now for these teams in the NFL? Because we have seen the latest contracts with Trevor Lawrence and Jared Goff. They're just crazy now. They're starting to get a little bit, I would dare say, out of hand, because it seems now that we're right there at the top, the limit of what maybe Jordan Love, Tua, and Dak could potentially be asking for. One of them, I feel like, is going to break through. Someone is going to break that $55 million per year barrier, and it seems like it's only going to continue to grow from then on, which takes up a huge portion, obviously, of each team's salary cap. If we're talking about 60 million, over 60 million, 59, 57, any number like that. And then you think about some of the young quarterbacks you still have in the league, like a CJ Stroud, like maybe if Bryce Young pans out a little bit more. Brock Purdy, how much is he going to get maybe next year? all these guys, someone is going to break that barrier, and then it's going to get a little bit more serious for these NFL teams and how they manage that, because it is taking up a lot of their salary cap. And the way it's going and the way it has been pushing so far, there has been certain alternatives that have begun to be discussed around the NFL with some of these owners talking about this, maybe just because it is getting a little bit out of hand. And NFL insider Tom Pelissero recently spoke about this issue on the Rich Eisen show, and he brought up, what the landscape is looking like with some of the conversation that is going on over these quarterback contracts so far in the NFL. And some of the things he said was that there has certainly been discussion within the league among certain owners about even the idea of a quarterback cap, that at some point you don't want the quarterback numbers to go over a certain percentage of your salary cap. To my knowledge, that hasn't really gained any traction, in part because so many teams have paid their quarterbacks already. And that is true. That's a great point that he does bring up there, Tom Pelissero. It would seem a little bit unfair for everyone to hand out these quarterback contracts right now, and then we're talking about a salary cap for just quarterbacks. It's an interesting idea for a solution, I guess, to this potential problem that could become a bit more serious later on, just because it is getting to a point where if we're talking about $60 million per year, then you get to a point where the quarterbacks, depending on who it is, I've been on here talking about some quarterbacks not earning those $55 million or potentially earning $50 million per year. And if somebody jumps up to 60 and we get up to that point and say people will always discuss if they deserve it or not, but if they don't deserve it, then they're almost making double of what the highest paid skill player is making currently at this moment, which is Justin Jefferson at $35 million per year. So it doesn't have to be fair, but it just has to be somewhat, at least appearing fair, at least appearing translucent a little bit, to show that the quarterbacks aren't this much better than all the other skill players. That's not really the point of these contracts, I think, but it is pushing that narrative a little bit that the quarterback is so important, that teams value this quarterback position overly important. I think it is pushing that limit now, that it seems like the quarterbacks and that NFL teams right now are so afraid of falling into this hole of not having a quarterback. And of course it is a troubling situation. You just look at some teams. The Houston Texans had no real hope at all at some point before they got CJ Stroud, and how bad things looked with Davis Mills. Once Aaron Rodgers goes down, how that situation really looked a lot worse than it should have, with just changing the quarterback out, with how talented the roster was. Just seeing Aaron Rodgers go down, you bring in Zach Wilson, Tim Boyle, and that offense completely just isn't the same at all. No sort of remark or any sort of idea that it was the New York Jets. You would have thought it was a completely different team the way they were playing, but that's how much the quarterback position is valued. But to go over and say that some of these quarterbacks are worth this much or just pushing over this much, I think teams now are almost overpaying to just have a decent quarterback. And when I say decent, I just mean not considered or pushing some of these top 7, top 5 quarterbacks that you feel like are givens in the NFL, like the Patricks, the Lamars, the Herberts, the Burrows, those names. If you're not pushing those names and you're not up there on that list of quarterbacks, then teams are still going to pay you a lot of money just so they don't fall into this hole of trying to work their way up, trying to find a quarterback, going through the circuit of trying to draft a quarterback, maybe sign one in free agency. It takes a while, and teams, quite frankly, just don't know when or if ever they're going to jump out of that situation, so they'll overpay a few extra millions of dollars to not just be in that position, and they're almost just settling for being average at that position just so they're not really bad at it. And I don't think that's the way to go about it at all. If you look at some of these stats around the quarterback contracts, the top 11 contracts in the NFL based on total money are all quarterbacks according to SpotRack. Then you look at the top 16 NFL contracts in terms of average annual salary, and the top 16 again are all quarterbacks. And one more, if you look at the top contracts in terms of practical guaranteed money, again, all quarterbacks, those top 12 in practical guaranteed money. No position player, like I mentioned, makes over $35 million per year, which is now only just set at Justin Jefferson. And it is interesting because if you take away the quarterback position or the responsibilities that the quarterback has to do in just his position in a game, it is interesting because I feel like most teams, most other players would value a Nick Bosa, a Justin Jefferson, a CeeDee Lamb, a Trent Williams, Christian Darrisaw, a Christian McCaffrey. These type of players, I think most other players around the NFL, most fans, most organization members would take any of these players probably before some quarterbacks that are making $40 million right now, or maybe even pushing $50 million. Like, I don't want to throw any shade or disrespect at anybody, but Kyler Murray making $46 million per year, Daniel Jones making about $40 million per year. Some quarterbacks are even underpaid at $40 million per year, with Matthew Stafford earning that much, and I don't think many people would say that Kyler or some other quarterbacks maybe pushing into the 50s like Trevor potentially are worth that much more than Matthew Stafford even at 36 years old, or that they are so much more valuable to a team that they should be paid almost double of what some of these players are making. You know, if you think about it, Christian being paid almost $20 million per year, is Daniel Jones worth, double what he's making at $40 million per year? Is he worth double? Does he bring double the amount of value to the New York Giants that Christian McCaffrey does? Obviously he doesn't, but just based on the money, just because they are a quarterback, they're almost given that free pass because teams are so afraid to fall into a category where they have no quarterback and then the year's almost basically just thrown out the window. There's no hope, and that is fair. I do acknowledge that point of how important it is, but at the same time, I think the discrepancy is my biggest issue with it, and some quarterbacks with such a inflated market right now are benefiting over it a little bit more, and some teams are suffering more because of that problem now, that they want to have a good quarterback, but they don't want to overpay, and if they do overpay, how do they build out the rest of their roster? How good is a quarterback if you don't have any weapons or you can't pay enough to get yourself a decent number one receiver, a good number two, because that is the way the NFL is going right now. You need a good offense. You need more than just one very good wide receiver. You also need a great O-line, and they definitely deserve to get paid a lot, pushing the 25s, maybe a little bit more than that per year. So you need all of this, and if you're allocating so much money to just the salary cap for one guy, one quarterback that might not even be considered top 7, top 8, that's where most of these teams, fluctuate. That's where you get a lot of issues, and then teams just make a lot of mistakes that way. And having your own salary cap just specifically for quarterbacks, it is an interesting idea. It is just something to at least try and solve this problem. I don't think it's a problem right now, but once this starts pushing over 60 or close to 60, I think that's when the NFL can start having more serious conversations about how to address this, because as long as the salary cap goes up overall for the entire NFL, all these numbers are most likely going to be pushed up as well. So maybe nothing really needs to be done, but it is a big shocker when you see quarterbacks making maybe 60 over that per year and nobody else is making close to 40. And some other things that pop up, you get some skill players trying to up their value a little bit more, trying to negotiate for more money because potentially they see some quarterbacks, again, maybe not contributing as much as they feel they're contributing, and they're making almost double what they're making. So if that is the case, some of these skill-based position players are looking at that scenario and thinking, there's no way this quarterback can be making this much. Why can't I just push for a couple extra bucks? And then a couple turns into a few, and then a few turns into $10 million, $8 million more. Then these teams would definitely want to pay, just because some skill players don't feel that discrepancy should be as much. And I know most players, most wide receivers will just compare themselves to wide receivers, but I feel like that's only temporary. I feel like that's only to an extent until these quarterbacks really start pushing into those high numbers. Then it's going to be a problem for everybody else looking at these quarterbacks making so much more than them, and that just doesn't seem fair to some of these players. But if these quarterbacks deals, like I mentioned, start pushing up a little bit more, it should become a problem that the NFL should have some conversation around. And What do you do from there? I can't give a solution just because there is a lot of metrics and a lot of little things that go into this over salary cap, and then how do you distinguish between the quarterback salary cap and what goes into that, and everything that just goes into the financial part of this all. It's hard to come up with a solution right now, but it is, I feel like, starting to gain a little bit more traction. And now you just look at when Dak got his contract extension. For the last point to make about this, when he got his contract extension about 4 years ago, that was looked at as a massive, massive contract that almost pushed him towards the top, and he was making $40 million per year. And now you see, just in the span of 3 years, maybe a little bit more, but now pushing on to 4, that it has jumped up almost $20 million per year. And now you can only imagine what the next 3 to 4 years could look like if that is to be the trend in the NFL. It's just something interesting that I thought, somebody actually talking about it in Tom Pelissero and bringing up the idea of having the own salary cap for the quarterbacks. It doesn't seem too legit right now, but I think it's something that definitely needs to be brought up a little bit more, so I thought I'd come on here and discuss, and just my thoughts around how this quarterback market is just getting a little bit too out of control for my liking. But I'm not in the position to make these sort of choices. Those are left for some of these members in the NFL. So we'll see where it goes from there. But that means that we're going to go into a quick break and leave that topic there for now. I'm sure we're going to talk a lot more about this as the offseason goes on. But like I mentioned, we're going to go into a quick break. And on the other side of that, we're going to talk about the AFC South quickly becoming one of the most exciting divisions in not just the AFC, but in the entire NFL. The quarterbacks are obviously going to gain the most attention, but what did one defender say is the next position that he feels is a massive difference maker in terms of where these teams finish in terms of seeding? We're going to talk about that when we return in just a few seconds. Don't go anywhere.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Jumping right back into the show and into our next topic around the AFC South. I've talked a few bits about the AFC South and the Jaguars, and obviously Trevor Lawrence, the Tennessee Titans, and their new wide receiver group. Stephon Diggs obviously going to the Texans, and you have the Indianapolis Colts with Anthony Richardson making a comeback. I've talked a good bit about this division, and it is warranted because the way that it's going with all the young talent in there, with all the high-powered offenses, and just the excitement around this division, I think it's slowly growing into one of the best, definitely in the AFC, but arguably in the entire NFL, mostly because of the quarterbacks that I just mentioned. You have one of the highest paid in the NFL in Trevor, the Offensive Rookie of the Year in C.J. Stroud. In just the few sample games that we saw with Anthony Richardson, in just that little amount of time that we saw out of him, you saw the potential threat that he could be on that side of the ball. And also Will Levis, he had his bright moments. He had a bit of a struggling point at some point during his rookie year, but also the game against Atlanta, his first game ever, he balled out. Against Miami, getting a massive win on the road against them. He certainly showed out in some games that should give Tennessee Titans fans a good bit of hope going into 2024, especially getting a new offensive mind as a head coach in Brian Callahan. So that should be the biggest difference maker, right? Which quarterback is the best will most likely determine which team is the best. But a Jaguar safety, Andre Sisco, in his second year, I want to say, he believes that people shouldn't be sleeping on the wide receivers in this division. Basically, he believes that they're as big a difference makers as the quarterbacks can be in this division. If you just look at it, he mentioned that the biggest difference I see is the quality of receivers in the division. I think the receivers have taken a huge jump from what the past 2 years have been in this division. And if we want to take a look at that, and I pretty much agree with what Andre Cisco is saying there by mentioning that point, what the biggest difference makers are. Again, if you just look at it, so two of the teams right now on your screen, as you see, the Jacksonville Jaguars brought in Gabe Davis. They had Christian Kirk, and they also drafted Brian Thomas Jr., who I'm a big fan of. I feel like he was overshadowed a little bit by Malik Nabers, because Malik Nabers definitely deserved all the attention, but Brian Thomas Jr. is certainly a very good player, and I love that he got drafted there with Calvin Ridley moving on within the division, so that was much needed for the Jaguars, and that wide receiver group is already as exciting as most of them get in the entire AFC and in the NFL. Then you look to the right of that, you look at the Houston Texans, probably the best wide receiving trio in this division, I would probably say, with Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins breaking out this year, drafting Tank Dell as well, and he was well on his way to 1,000 yards as a rookie before he got hurt. So 3 other very impressive players that you have in the Houston Texans. Then if we want to move on to the final 2 teams, you have the Indianapolis Colts on your right. They drafted A.D. Mitchell, big fan of him. To get him in the second round, I think is an absolute steal for the Colts. They were able to bring back Michael Pittman and re-sign him for what seems like a bargain right now, getting him at around $24 million per year, with what everybody else is 100 or 800 yards last year as a rookie. And again, nobody really points him out that much because the Colts struggled a little bit last year once Anthony Richardson went down. So with that being the case, he got a little bit overshadowed. That's all right. I think he has all the potential to have a massive jump in his second year. Then you look at the Tennessee Titans, and really went from about a 3 or a 4 out of a scale of 10 in terms of their wide receiver group, and jumped up all the way up to a 9, in my opinion, with finding some help for DeAndre Hopkins in Calvin Ridley, stealing him away from the Jacksonville Jaguars in free agency. Did they overpay for him? That's a little bit subjective. Maybe for some people, they definitely overpaid, but I still think he's capable of being a number 1 receiver. So if he's still a number 1, if you could get him on your team, I would certainly do whatever it takes to do that. And that's exactly what the Titans did. And then you look at Tyler Boyd, one of the best remaining free agents and one of the most savvy, experienced number 3 options that you can find anywhere. If he's your number 3, he could very well be a lot of teams' number 2. Maybe not so much a number 1, but a very good number 2. The fact that the Titans got all these guys, 2 out of the 3 of them, in this offseason is very exciting for these Tennessee Titans fans. And I would have to agree with what Andre Cisco said as the wide receivers being the biggest difference makers in this division. And also, he made a great point that I thought was worth mentioning further in that interview when he said that all quarterbacks in the NFL are basically obviously really good. There's not too many duds out there or many quarterbacks that you can go in and think that you don't have to give your all against them. Most of them, as the NFL really, in my opinion, just gets more talented, more just athletic. All these guys are getting bigger, stronger, and more just physically impressive out there on the field, especially the quarterbacks being able to do so much. And again, just being more athletic than what we've seen maybe in the past. You don't really find too many quarterbacks that you think we could just take it a little bit easier today. We don't have to go 100. Maybe let's give 60 to 70%, and we're still going to get out with a win. That's not the case, especially in this division, like I mentioned. So with that being the case, other positions now have to step up, according to Andre Cisco, and he feels that all these teams in the division have done a great job of trying to do that, and that it will most likely come down to this group to determine a lot of games. And I think that was a great point. It also helps that 3 out of the 4 quarterbacks in this division are still on their rookie deals, which is almost a cheat code for all these teams, because they could go out and make these signings, like obviously Calvin Ridley, re-signing Michael Pittman, bringing on Stephon Diggs' contract, and just going along those lines. It certainly helps to do this, and obviously it's a lot easier, but even with the Jaguars, they just gave a lot of money, obviously, to Trevor Lawrence, but they were able to still draft Brian Thomas, bring Gabe Davis, who is a solid option there, and Christian Kirk is still on the team, so that's a decent wide receiver group. So along that point, along about talking the Jacksonville Jaguars and me mentioning their receiving group as a decent, I think if we were to compare them, and obviously these are the difference makers on the field for these teams, I think the Jaguars and the Colts seem to be third and fourth in those groups. I know I ranked the wide receivers, and I probably had it in that order, as the Colts and the Jaguars are being just a little bit below the Texans and the Titans, in my opinion, just because it was a massive loss for the Jaguars to lose Calvin Ridley. If they had Calvin Ridley still on this team, they would be overflowing with the potential at this group, but especially losing him to the Titans, I think that stings, and it just makes the Titans that much better because they have now 2 number ones. And also with the Colts, you look at them, very young. Josh Downs, very young, going into his second year, and A.D. Mitchell, going to be a rookie this year. Michael Pittman is slowly, to me, I know he just came off of his best year, but I feel like I want to see a little bit more. I know he could be capable of doing a bit more, but for right now, I would probably still take Hopkins, arguably Calvin Ridley, Stephon Diggs, again, arguably Nico Collins, among those players that I could take over Michael Pittman. I just don't think he's distinguished himself that much as of yet. Obviously, not having Anthony Richardson played a part in that, so if he could change my mind and if I could be wrong about him this year, that would be great. It'll just make for these games and make them a lot more competitive if Michael Pittman can just explode onto the scene even more than he did last year. But the Jaguars and the Colts, in my opinion, are just a little bit below the Titans and the Houston Texans there. That's why I sort of mentioned when I was going over some of the potential fits for T. Higgins and also Brandon Ayuk to an extent as a good landing spot with the Jacksonville Jaguars or the Indianapolis Colts. If they got one of those guys, their wide receiver group, again, would jump up from probably a 6 to a 5 right now to making that jump to all the way to a 9, potentially, if you got one of those guys in the next year or the next few months here in this offseason. But I agree with Cisco that these receivers are going to be the difference maker, but how do you stop it? How do you counteract it? Is it more offense? Do you go out and get another wide receiver like I mentioned in T. Higgins or Brandon Ayuk? Or do you improve your defense and try to stop it that way? I think it really depends on what kind of fan you are. To me, I love seeing defense. I love seeing the defenses going out there. I love seeing, from time to time, a low-scoring game. I don't want to see every game be low-scoring, but I do appreciate when defenses are going crazy, making plays, just the offenses just can't get anything done. I think it throws a good wrench in the monotony of everything from time to time that it is exciting a little bit when players are making diving pass breakups or interceptions. You get some sacks, you get some great TFLs. I love seeing that, and I think right now, if we were to go that route and try to improve our defenses to try and negate some of these wide receivers at this position, I think the Houston Texans and the Tennessee Titans right now are in the best spots to do that, to get a stop on defense, to sort of slow down these high-powered offenses because of how much they've improved on that side of the ball. The Texans bringing in Danielle Hunter. They obviously still had Will Anderson. And on the defensive side of the ball, they signed Al-Shaair, the linebacker. They drafted, I forget his name, the corner from Georgia. His name's just escaping my mind. But overall, I think Houston probably has the most balanced team on the defensive side of the ball. It's hard to pick out one major weakness for them on that side. Then you have the Tennessee Titans, who I think are the second most equipped team to make a defensive stop with how much better they improved their secondary, bringing in L'Jarius Sneed, signing Chidobe Awuzie, already having Roger McCreary, and being a lot more able to play man coverage. The biggest question with them is their pass rush. Can it just be enough with Jeffrey Simmons? He is very good, but to me, that's just not enough. You need a little bit more there. You look at the Indianapolis Colts now, and they are just very young overall. I think last year they had the youngest secondary in the entire NFL, and their pass rush really isn't too prominent right now. They just drafted Laiatu Latu out of UCLA, so that's a little bit more promising there. You hope he comes along a lot quicker. But right now, they're a little bit too young, like most of their team is. And the Jacksonville Jaguars arguably have the best defensive line. They're right there with the Houston Texans, in my opinion. But questions at their secondary, at the second level with their linebackers, their middle linebackers, that is, still give me a little bit unease on how much they can contribute. It can't just all be the defensive line, because sometimes they might have an off day, and if the secondary is not giving them enough time to get to the quarterback, obviously that's a problem that they just can't resolve, and it's going to become frustrating for those pass rushers, and they really can't show out if they don't have more than half a second, 1 second to get to the quarterback. It's not going to work out. To me, the Houston Texans are the best equipped to do that, and I think that's the way to go. I think defense, trying to improve your defense, is the way to go. With so many talented receivers, you can only really have 3 or 4 out there at a time and really be efficient with it. So improving your defense is the way I think these teams have to go to try and negate and try to create another difference maker out there in this division. It's certainly going to be must-watch football. I can't wait to watch this division, and I think it really rivals the AFC North as the best division in the AFC overall. The AFC East is getting there. The AFC West, not really, with just the Chargers. This and the North are really two of the best, probably the two best in the AFC. I'm definitely going to be tuning into those games over the course of this year. But with that being said, we're going to go into another break. And when we return, we got 2 more segments to talk about. More information came out on the Aaron Rodgers case about missing mandatory minicamp. So we'll discuss some of that and what this outlook could be for the New York Jets in 2024. Then a bit of a fun one, some clauses in these NFL contracts that prohibit players from doing certain activities in the offseason now that we're just taking away some of the days up until training camp. A lot of these players have a lot of free time in their hands, so what can they do, what can't they do in this offseason according to their contracts? We're going to get into all those specifics and the potential punishments after this break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the show, and jumping right into our next segment on more on the New York Jets and the Aaron Rodgers situation that has been going on. I've talked a few bit about this, Rodgers not being at mandatory minicamp, not being a good look for a lot of people, including myself to a degree. I thought it didn't really send a great message to his team to not be at the mandatory part of it. He is still going to be fine because the alternative to not being there, his reason for not being there, it was deemed as an unexcused absence. So no one really knows exactly why he wasn't there, where he went exactly. There were some guesses, people assuming that he went on one of these unique special retreats that he goes on. I won't go more into that. I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about, but that is his business. Honestly, it's no one's business what he does, but it starts to get a little bit sensitive and a little bit tricky when it does get into the work side of things, right? Obviously, you missing mandatory minicamp, and now people sort of feel an urge to talk about it because it does affect your line of work and what you do. But according to Sports Illustrated's Albert Breer, Rodgers was, according to him, good with the New York Jets, unexcusing him and keeping everybody under one set of rules, making his reason for not being there as unexcused. He felt all right with that, and he understood where the Jets were coming from. According to Breer, he said they could not excuse Aaron Rodgers and his reason for not being there and maintain a credibility with the rest of the locker room, and that makes sense. I would hope it would be like that, because if it wasn't like that, and it would just create a lot a lot bigger narrative, in my opinion, and it would have become a bigger issue because now you're not even trying to hide the fact that Aaron Rodgers is getting special treatment when we all sort of know that the quarterbacks obviously get that special treatment, especially if you're a veteran and have had all the success that Aaron Rodgers has had in his career. There's no secret that he gets treated differently. And I don't think there's a problem with that, with how important the quarterback position is. I know I just finished talking about how it could be overvalued at that spot, but not when it comes to a guy like Aaron, with how successful he is, how talented he is. Not a lot of guys can say they have the arm talent that Rodgers has. So based on that and how much of a difference maker he could be, it isn't a problem to me that he does get treated differently, but you can't not just make it seem like he isn't. So that's the right way of going about it. That I felt that was the right way of handling that situation, at least as the minimum for the New York Jets. But people felt it sent a wrong message. You know, they also said that Rodgers was selfish. He wasn't a leader, no commitment, even though he was there for the voluntary portion of the offseason through OTAs and the voluntary workouts in April and in the start of May that the players usually skip. So the fact that he was there, I'm not saying it's a trade-off or an excuse to not be at the mandatory portion. Ideally, you'd want him there for everything, especially coming off of an injury and not getting that chemistry building time with his teammates. But some players like Sauce Gardner, Robert Saleh, Breece Hall, DJ Reed were just some of the many teammates that came out and spoke publicly about defending Aaron Rodgers in this situation. And it seems like they didn't have a big problem with him not being there. And again, I feel like it's really no one's business, honestly, where he is or if he plays great or not. No one would really care if he just plays great. And if he doesn't show up to mandatory minicamp, it won't really matter. But again, if he does miss this part, and if he doesn't play great and the New York Jets miss the playoffs again and maybe they finish third or something and it's not even close to them making the playoffs, that's when it becomes a problem. That's when it becomes really bad. And I'm more worried about not where Aaron Rodgers is, what he's doing in his free time. As long as he's out there playing football and playing to the level that everybody expects him to, he could do whatever he wants in his free time when he's not supposed to be there, or even in this offseason portion when we're still in early June, mid-June right now. If he's not there and if he could still play great, I don't really care. As long as he's not doing obviously anything illegal or anything bad, he could do anything he wants. And if he's still doing his job, that's all right with me. I'm more worried about the O-line and how Nathaniel Hackett calls this offense rather than worrying if Aaron Rodgers is going to be good or not. I think he's too talented to worry more about him than the offensive line and them not getting enough repetition together. Nathaniel Hackett, how qualified he is to call this offense with how poor it looked last year after Aaron Rodgers went down. It's funny because I think most fans would arguably agree with that sentiment and don't really agree so much with what the media is saying and how other people have talked about Aaron Rodgers. If you would give the option to most fans, if they would rather have Rodgers miss mandatory minicamp and still play great, or rather him be there but not be as good, that's obviously an easy decision. Fans don't really pay too much attention right now anyway to mandatory minicamp or how everyone's performing. Once it gets into September, maybe they'll tune in a little bit in the preseason, but once it gets more to game time, that's when fans will start to care. And I feel like most of them are in the same boat as me. I feel like people are just waiting for a reason to jump on Aaron Rodgers to attack him because honestly he just rubs people the wrong way on how he answers things or just how he talks about certain things, and that might rub people the wrong way. But again, if I was a fan of the Jets, I wouldn't care about too much of what Aaron Rodgers does and all the weird stuff he might do in the offseason. It bothers a lot of people, but as long as he does great, I don't really mind. I feel like it doesn't gain Rodgers anything by showing people potentially that he has this special treatment or this special rule that just applies to him with the New York Jets, because he's even acknowledged the fact that they're all going to be gone and they're all going to be out of there if he doesn't perform well. So knowing that he already has that pressure on him, on the coaches, on all the organization, all that pressure on his back, I don't think he really gains anything from almost showing up all these people by showing, hey, I don't have to be a mandatory minicamp, and they're not going to do a darn thing about it. I don't think he gains anything really from that, from where he is in his career, for what he has to do in this offseason. The expectations are still going to be there, so he's acknowledged the fact that if he doesn't play great, they're not going to be there. He's going to move on, and that would probably, I would guess, be it for him in the NFL if he doesn't play well, because he does come with all this extra baggage that a lot of people don't really like. So if he doesn't play well, that could just be it for him. And again, he doesn't gain too much from showing up the New York Jets by showing everybody that he might have this special privilege. To me, in terms of what could be deemed as a success for the New York Jets in 2024, because really that's what it all comes down to at the end of the day. With Rodgers, is he here or not? Should he be here or not? Is he a good leader? Is he determined? What does this mean for his teammates? None of that really matters. Only how it is performed out there on the field. And to me, if they go out there and win a playoff game, I think everybody can be 100% happy with what this New York Jets team did in 2024. They could be satisfied really by just making the playoffs. Again, I would deem it 75 to 80% successful if they just make the playoffs alone, or they win the division and again obviously make the playoffs. That could be deemed about an 80% success for that season, because the Jets haven't been that successful in a long time. The last time they made the playoffs was in 2010, and the last time they won the division was in 2022. This arguably gives them their best shot of doing that, so anything besides not making the playoffs should be an absolute failure. But if they make the playoffs, at least that should be okay, a check mark on this season. And if they win a playoff game, that now you're doing a little bit more. I don't think anybody really expects them to win a playoff game, if I'm being completely honest. They have the talent, certainly, to be competitive this year, but the AFC North is really tough, and where everybody is in their career, with Mike Williams coming off an injury, Rodgers coming off an injury, being an older player in the league, this offensive line getting pieced together, not having the repetition that really makes me comfortable. There are a lot of variables that people could point to towards the end of the season and really reason why they didn't make the playoffs. Oh, it was because of this, this, and this. But if they get to the playoffs, that's a success. If they win a playoff game, they're doing a lot more than a lot of people expected them to. So that's where I'm at with it, with Rodgers and what he's doing in the offseason. If he could be successful and do what I just mentioned, get to the playoffs, no one's going to be talking about mandatory minicamp. That's the reality of it. Again, I feel like just people are waiting to jump on him and waiting for their moment to jump back to this point in time if they do fail in the regular season and go, that's why he wasn't a mandatory minicamp. This is why they failed. Because you saw it in mandatory minicamp, you should have known that it wasn't going to be a success in the regular season. I feel like people are waiting for that moment. I'm pretty confident in the Jets. It is very competitive, like I mentioned, but I think they could give themselves a good chance in the AFC East, with Miami being a little bit here or there. The Bills, uncertain of what their offense is going to look like. The Patriots are the Patriots and where they are in their rebuild. So they have a good chance of at least competing solidified for that division. So we're going to see how they do perform overall in 2024. But that is that segment. We're going to talk briefly about one more when we return after the break. Some clauses in some contracts that prohibit players from doing certain things and what they're allowed to do during this offseason period heading into training camp. So I'll touch on that when we return in just a few seconds. Thank you for joining me back here on the show for the last segment on today's podcast. Like I mentioned, going over just some clauses that we could see in some of these contracts during this offseason period where there's no practices, there's no minicamp, there's no voluntary stuff going on. We have about 4 to 5 weeks right now where players can take off, train on their own time, and that could get a little bit tricky in some instances because, like I mentioned, standard NFL contracts say that guarantees can be voided if players are injured participating in activities without a significant or with a significant risk of injury, and especially first-round draft picks could actually have specific activities in their contracts that they can't really do in this portion of the time because it's very much a very antsy situation. If you're an organization, you have this diamond, right? This diamond in the rough that you found in the first round. Say a player drops. Say the Eagles, Quinyon Mitchell. He drops to them at 20. You don't want anybody looking at him funny. You don't want him doing anything dangerous in the offseason. You want to make sure he gets through training camp, through everything, and that he's able to play for you in the regular season. That's how serious some of these things get. Even though it might not seem like these players are really doing anything that harmful to them, it still can lead to some very odd situations where some players have gotten hurt doing the craziest of things that you wouldn't even imagine. One instance that I read about was Steve Smith, the former wide receiver for the Baltimore Ravens and the Carolina Panthers. He actually broke his forearm back in 2010 playing flag football. How he did that, I have no idea. How do you break your arm playing flag football? That is beyond me, but it did happen back in 2010. So that's something just odd that could happen. Basketball, I feel like, is also another yellow flag, I would say. Not completely red, like no player could play basketball at all during this offseason period. But for a lot of teams, it's a little bit of, you could do it here, but you can't do it with this group. Or you can't do it at this location, and you can't play it 3 days in a row. It has a little bit of give and take. A lot of context goes behind playing basketball, I feel like, for a lot of teams. And it just really depends. It's all about the extra sort of stuff like snowboarding, going skiing, riding on jet skis is a big one. ATVs is another one. Doing all this extra stuff where you go out on an adventure and try these new things, potentially dangerous things, is where NFL teams get a little bit skeptical, and to the point where they had to add some of these special stipulations that were pretty interesting to look at. I have some of them written down. One of them is Patrick Mahomes. He would void all of his guarantees if he got hurt actually playing basketball. So I saw Tyrann Mathieu also talk about it in an interview. When he was with the Kansas City Chiefs, he brought up the idea that basketball was a big problem there because there was a video of Patrick Mahomes playing. It made the Chiefs feel uneasy about it, so they really told everybody to lay off of it as best as they can. Then you have Myles Garrett along the same lines. Again, almost prohibited from playing too much pickup basketball, full-on 5-on-5, going through these pickup games against people that obviously don't have as much to lose as Myles Garrett and how vital he is to the Cleveland Browns. He has been told by the organization to sort of limit that, but he could, include some all-star games in there, maybe just 2v2s, 1v1s, or something like that. It all comes with context, but I thought that was another interesting one. No basketball for Mahomes or Myles Garrett, and George Kittle possibly having one of the more interesting ones. He would void $100,000 in bonus money if he hurt himself while doing something involved with the WWE. Obviously, George Kittle is a massive fan of the WWE. We've seen him at the event. He was at WrestleMania 39. He actually participated in a match with The Miz and Pat McAfee. Funny enough, a former football player. So it might not seem dangerous, but there are actual clauses in contracts that prohibit some of these. I think George Kittle mentioned also that after that, he got a text from his general manager, John Lynch, sort of saying, I hope you're having fun. I hope you're safe, but don't ever do that again. So it goes along those lines, almost like a helicopter parent making sure that their precious child, their precious asset can't and will be present for them when they are needed to the most. And some head coaches like Jonathan Gannon, Zach Taylor aren't so extreme with it. They trust their players to do the right thing because they should know that football is their main job and the thing that they're getting paid for thousands of dollars, millions of dollars to do. So they should acknowledge that fact and not do something stupid in the offseason. While other coaches, actually like assistant head coach for the Atlanta Falcons, Jerry Gray, actually encourages his secondary players to go out and play basketball because he claims it helps with playing in the backfield and helps with covering players, orientating yourself in a defensive scheme in basketball. It was pretty odd and not really convincing. I don't really buy what he's selling, but he's just one example of how different these coaches really approach the offseason and doing some of these things. But you have others like Andy Reid making sure that his most valuable players don't do anything dumb. And it is interesting because we are in that period right now where we have a lot of free time, or I shouldn't say we, the players have a lot of free time where they can go out, try different things, and yeah, maybe it doesn't seem dangerous in the moment, but it really is something that not only a lot of people think about. There was an instance where Andrew Luck, he admitted that 2 years after the fact that in a snowboarding or a skiing event that he went to, a vacation that he went on, he actually hurt his throwing shoulder in that. There was the ACL and MCL injury that Naheem Hines had, just sitting on a jet ski. Somebody else crashed into him, and he had to void some of his bonus money because of just, really sitting there. It wasn't his fault, but that is what we're working with here with such valuable assets in football players. There was another one, most famously with JPP. I shouldn't be laughing with the fireworks and his finger obviously having to be amputated. Certain things like that, like you can't be doing, man. Come on. Like we have to be a little bit smarter about that. And it is funny now heading into this day and age where a lot of people are playing a lot more video games. And I'm sure that coaches would love that if everybody would just stay inside, play Call of Duty all day, play Madden all day, and not have any risk of injuring themselves. But that's not the reality. Some of these players are pretty active in their off time and like to get out there and do other things. So hopefully nobody gets hurt. We want to see everybody healthy for training camp and the regular season, but we're going to see how everybody heads into training camp. Hopefully, fingers crossed, 100% healthy, especially if you guys are fans of any team out there. Hopefully none of your players are doing anything dumb in this free time. But with that being said, I will wrap up this segment and we'll wrap up the show on this segment. I want to thank you guys for tuning into today's show. And please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Make sure to also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok for more of the network's content. And if you want to see more of these live shows with me, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel for more content around the NFL. And as a final reminder, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more football discussions and NFL conversations with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you guys for joining me today. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I hope again to see you guys back here with me on Monday.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.